This edition of Mac Voices is brought to you by Smile, the makers of the brand new PDF Pen 6, PDF Pen Pro 6, and PDF Pen for iPad and PDF Pen for iPhone. Find out more about all the flavors of PDF Pen at smilesoftware.com. Welcome to Mac Voices. This is the Talk of the Mac community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, it's been not long enough since we had Joe Kissell on.
Nice.
That's the best introduction I've given Joe in a long time. He's got another update to one of his Take Control books. This time it's Take Control of iCloud. Joe, it's great to have you back as always. I'm teasing you, of course.
Well, I enjoy camping out in your living room. You really need to put more beer in the fridge, though, because come on. It seems like I live here is kind of my point.
Yeah, well, I like it. I like it. But anybody that knows me knows that there's a lot of ginger ale in the fridge and no beer. So sorry. Well,
there you go. See, not enough.
Yeah.
iCloud. You know, Apple keeps. So here's the thing. Apple. Ever since the days of well, not iWork, but certainly .Mac. Since the .Mac days, you know, I had a book on .Mac, I had a book on Mobile Me, and I have the book on iCloud. And this series of books has gone through all these different iterations, and it has been Apple's custom that every time I release an update to the book, they immediately change something so that the book is no longer accurate. And Apple has done exactly the same thing this time. We can count on this. If we want something to happen with iCloud, all we need to do is I need to ship an update to this book, and boom, you know, Apple makes changes. So this time, we had finished this big update, version 1.4, which covers, you know, iOS 6, a new version of the Apple TV software, and changes Apple's made to their website and all this stuff. And so it was finished, it was shipping, and Apple, Adam was in the process of typing up the email that was going to get sent out to all the people that already have it, letting them know about the free update. And then we hear from Apple, they have this new thing. They now offer what they call two-step verification for Apple IDs. So it's this extra security measure, and I was like, of course, you know, I have to mention this. You can't have a new book on iCloud that comes out now that doesn't mention this, but of course I hadn't mentioned it. So luckily, Glenn Fleischman wrote a really great article about this for Tidbits, and I decided that the best thing to do was not to reinvent the wheel, but just sort of say a little bit about this thing in the book and point people to Glenn's article, which everyone should read. So we are now scrambling today to do version 1.4.1, which will be, you know, obviously out by the time anybody watches or listens to this show. But it's just kind of, you know, Apple being Apple. They just watch when, you know, if Kissell releases a new update to his book, that means, you know, press the button, release new features. So
yeah, it seems to happen that way to so many authors and folks who try to prepare things and get them out. But I think it's also a symptom, Joe, of just how much Apple changes things in general. They are constantly rolling out updates. So, and maybe I'm just trying to make you feel better. I don't know which. So let's talk iCloud.
Okay.
iCloud, my experience seems to be that for most people, iCloud either works really well for what they use it for, or it turns into a real big challenge for them. Mm-hmm. Why? Why do so many people seem to have such different experiences with iCloud?
Well, I will start by saying that I am one of those people for whom iCloud largely just works. I have had, you know, a few little glitches now and then, but for the most part, iCloud does what I expect it to do the way I expect it to do it. Now, having said that, I don't use my Apple ID email address as my primary email address. I check it, but it's not by any means my main means of communication. And a lot of the other things that people do with iCloud, I use them, but I don't rely super heavily on them. The thing I use the most in iCloud actually is calendars. I like iCloud's version of calendar syncing better than Google's or better than Exchange. So I do rely on that. But because I don't use it in the same way that some people do, I don't have some of the problems other people do. So there's that. There's still I think a lot of sort of people expect iCloud to behave like MobileMe did, or like like Dropbox does, or like something else. And there's still this problem of expectations not entirely aligning with reality. So there is a bit of that. And then there's also certainly a bit of things just break. So a couple of weeks ago, there was an outage, and certain, like most I don't know what percentage of iCloud users this affected, but most of the people who were affected would try, pick up any device and enter your password. Well, okay, enter my password, and then no, try again, and they just kept being prompted on all their devices to re-enter their passwords. So one improvement Apple has made is there's a status page now online where you can see exactly what parts of iCloud are up, are down. If something is down, when is it scheduled to be up again? And what is the recent history? You can look and see, well, the mail part was out for 20% of users between 8 and 9 a.m. on this day or whatever. So that's nice that they're keeping people informed like that. But at a certain point, you just have to say iCloud is what it is. And if it is working for you, fantastic. And if it isn't, don't get mad at Apple. Use something else. I mean, seriously, use something else. It's okay if you use something else. You're not going to lose any sort of Apple geek points. Just do what is best for you. If to the extent that it works for me, I'm happy with it, and I totally understand that it isn't great for some other people for some other things, and that's all good. Like I think we talked about before, documents in the cloud is kind of meh, it kind of sort of works in some situations, but not in many. So whatever, use Dropbox instead, or something like that. And very often that will just give you a better result, and don't worry about it. So that's kind of where I am with iCloud. I'm not gonna, I wrote the book about it, but I'm not gonna be some sort of, rah-rah evangelist like iCloud's the best, don't use anything else. No, of course. I mean, it has faults, it has flaws. And you can very clearly see that Apple is working on it. They are changing all kinds of stuff all the time, hence all the updates to the book. But it hasn't gotten to the point where I can feel really, really comfortable with entrusting my most important things to it.
I think you made a brilliant comment there that I know I'm guilty of, and it took me a while to come to understand it. Because I had become so used to Dropbox and the way it worked and the way I sort of thought about it, that I was expecting iCloud, when it came online in a bigger, badder way, to be a lot more Dropbox-like. And yeah. It's not. It seems like, at least at this point, it's intended to be a lot more behind the scenes, managing things for you, instead of giving you a tool to manage things yourself, which is
very much so.
Sort of like what Dropbox does.
Yeah, and I still feel sad about the loss of iDisk. I mean, when iDisk existed, it didn't work great, but it kind of worked. And Dropbox does what iDisk did, only a lot better. And I wish that Apple had kept that model, because I think ultimately it's a more flexible model and a more useful model. Not to mention the fact that Dropbox has been, on the whole, much, much more reliable than iDisk ever was, and then documents in the cloud is. But that said, there's no reason you can't use both. I mean, on my computer right now, let's see. I have iCloud, I have Dropbox, I have SugarSync, I have BitCasa, I have Transporter, and of course I have Crash Plan. And I'm just looking at all these little icons on my menu bar. There are probably other cloud services that I've just forgotten about. But I use a lot of different cloud services, and it's fine. I try to be smart, like not have 10 different things hammering on my disk and on my bandwidth at the same time, so that everything grinds to a halt. But I use different tools for different things, and there's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to use only iCloud. Use it for what it's good for, and don't worry about the rest.
this seems to be a very unusual conversation, the way this is going, to talk about the iCloud book when we're saying, well, use it, don't use it, you know. But again, I think it's important to understand that for some things and for most people, certain aspects of it work brilliantly. Contact syncing, calendar syncing, for me, and I'm just one person, but they work absolutely flawlessly. They're terrific.
Well, you know, something that came up recently was very much in the news was this silent email filtering. Now, this is not new. It has been happening all along. But some people from, I don't know, Macworld UK or somebody found a particular example of how the filtering was working that you know, is really kind of startling and egregious. So, you know, someone had written a screenplay and was sending this screenplay to his editor or something, and the screenplay was a PDF file. It was zipped, and that was sent as an attachment to an email message to a you know, an iCloud email address. And that screenplay, the PDF zipped attachment, had the phrase "barely legal teens" in it, and people discovered through trial and error testing that anything that has that phrase in it, even if it's a zipped attachment, will be prevented. Apple won't deliver it. And it's not that just they'll deliver it but mark it as junk. It actually doesn't come through at all. It is not retrievable in any way. You have no idea that someone even tried to send you something. And it's a situation where you can kind of understand why a filter like that would have come into existence. You know, a phrase like that tends to be used in porn, and I can understand how that might show up a lot in spammy email messages, but it could also show up in completely legitimate email messages. And the problem is Apple is trying to be sort of a parent here. Apple is trying to say, no, children, you mustn't ever look at this or use that or read the other. And you know, this goes to a bunch of the, sorry, my phone is ringing, but someone else will answer it soon. You know, Apple's choices of what apps appear in the App Store, and you know, you go to download an iOS web browser, and you have to, you know, click on this warning that says, I know that this might contain all this offensive information, which, you know, Apple doesn't seem to have to warn you about this when Safari can access all the same web pages. And so, you know, Apple is trying to make all of their products and services as family friendly and innocent and, you know, completely without any sort of you know, fault as possible. And in so doing, they make a lot of decisions that sort of drive it toward lowest common denominator stuff. And that can be a problem for anyone who needs to actually get work done, or you know, people who are more power users. So I understand why they're doing it. It's not the decision I would make if I were running the company, but I'm not running the company.
Joe, like everyone else, I watched this story develop. I watched the pundits scream bloody murder and say, you know, wow, barely legal teens is filtered. What else might be, you know, be filtered?
Right. And believe me, a lot of other things are filtered.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I guess where I'm going with this, if I remember correctly, Apple at one point tried to explain it as saying this was an overzealous spam filter. It had been tweaked or tuned or improperly, or needed to be tweaked or tuned better. Mm-hmm. And I guess I'm not going to give them a complete pass on this, but knowing myself how I've gone through and used, well, I used to use software that, you know, you taught it good words and bad words and good phrases and bad phrases. And it was relatively easy to overdo it if you weren't careful. It was very easy to underdo it, and you sometimes had to make a decision about which way you were going to go. Mm-hmm. So is it possible that this was just a legitimate attempt at tuning and didn't work, and maybe somebody went a little bit too far?
But so it's absolutely possible that it was a completely innocent mistake, and it's even possible that nobody explicitly put that phrase in there. There's just, you know, some automated routine came up with it. That's not the problem. The problem is that Apple silently deletes this stuff without any feedback to either the sender or the recipient. If Apple found all those messages and just mark them as junk, you know, they appear in your junk folder, so you can say, oh no, actually this isn't junk, then that would be fine. That would be totally forgivable. What isn't forgivable is, they don't bounce the message so the sender knows it wasn't received, and they don't put it in junk so the recipient knows that it might be spam. This is what Google does, and this is what pretty much all spam filtering does, is they say, well, we're pretty sure this is spam, and so we're going to put it in a spam folder or put a spam flag on it or do something. But you, the user, can make up your mind whether something is spam for you or not, and mark things wrong if we got them wrong. And by taking away the ability for recipients to make their own decisions, or at least notifying the senders that sorry, we couldn't deliver this because it looks suspicious to us, you create these communication breakdowns. How am I supposed to know that you didn't get this very important email message I sent to you because some wacky spam filter saw something that I never intended that way? But I mean, for all I know, Apple's spam filters are looking for the phrase "that's what she said." I mean, who knows? That something like that can have a certain set of connotations, or it can be absolutely, innocent, have nothing to do with anything. And the problem is that you just don't know. You have no transparency at all as to what Apple's doing. And that's really the part that bothers me.
And that's a great point, and that's legitimate. There are times this just seems like such a dumb mistake that I guess that's one reason that I had trouble getting too excited over it. It's like, okay, somebody found a bug. And this is another thing. We report bugs all the time, and people don't seem to be nearly as upset over bugs unless they delete information. We don't seem to be nearly as upset over reporting bugs as we do something like this, where the interpretation is censorship, and that kind of thing. And so, I use a Gmail, I use an Apple Mail address, but I don't use it as primary. So maybe that's why it didn't bother me so much.
Yeah.
But it just seems interesting that that's a conclusion everyone jumped to, and especially since it was, this particular phrase. If it had been something harmless like, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, go, maybe it wouldn't have bothered everyone. But the newest version of PDF Pen from Smile is here. PDF Pen 6 can now export to Microsoft Word format and sports a new editing bar for faster access to tools and properties. PDF Pen 6 is also fully optimized for Retina displays, so it looks better than ever. And Mac OS X features autosave, and versions are now fully supported. The new PDF Pen Pro 6 includes all that, plus gives users more control over document permission settings that restrict saving, printing, and copying, and simplifies creation of cross-platform interactive PDFs. Find out not only about all these new features, but all the capabilities of PDF Pen and PDF Pen Pro at smilesoftware.com. So let's talk about something that does work really, really well. And that is, as I said before, the calendar and contact syncing.
Yeah. I don't really have anything bad to say about calendar and contact syncing. Of course, I don't use Apple's calendar app except when I have to. I use BusyCal on my Mac because I still don't like the design of calendar, nay iCal. BusyCal is a lot more functional for what I need. But as far as the actual syncing of data behind the scenes, to the cloud and with iOS devices, it's gotten really good. I mean, one of the things that Apple changed in recent months that I do cover in this new edition is, in Mountain Lion, you no longer have Notes as part of the Mail app. Notes or a standalone application. And you no longer have Reminders as part of iCal. Now you have the Calendar app and the Reminders app. Those are separate things. So now in Mountain Lion, OS X mirrors the way things are divided up in iOS. And after after Mountain Lion, Apple made the same changes on the iCloud website. So it used to be that, if you go into iCloud.com and log in, you see Mail, and Mail contains your notes, and you see the Calendar app, and the Calendar app contains your reminders, and Apple has now separated those out as well. So other than making those changes to the way data is sort of grouped and represented in different apps, which may annoy some people. There's not a whole lot I can say about calendars and contacts. For me, they just really work. There are, it's not that there aren't any weird things happening, and every once in a while you get like a duplicated contact or something, and you go, how did that happen? The one thing that I have seen, and we probably talked about this before, because it comes up every once in a while in a customer email, is people get duplicated contacts and calendars because they're syncing their iPhones or iPads with iCloud, but they're also trying to sync them with iTunes on their Mac or PC. And if you're trying to sync one type of data to two different locations at once, it can kind of get into this loop where the syncs get out of sync, and so it looks like something has changed where it really hasn't, and so it just keeps multiplying and multiplying. So I do tell people that if you're going to sync with iCloud, sync only with iCloud, and don't try to sync it directly to iTunes. And if for some reason you don't want to sync with iCloud, that's fine. You can still continue to sync directly to your Mac or PC over Wi-Fi or USB, but just make sure that you don't get into these loops, because that's a path to unhappiness.
Joe, take us down that, not the path to unhappiness, but take us down this the syncing through iCloud thing for your iOS devices. I admit I'm one who is still just a little loath to do that, a little concerned about how long something might take, and about exactly how well it's going to work. Are you satisfied that I should be now syncing via iCloud for my iPad mini, and my iPhone?
Yeah, so I have stopped syncing my iOS devices to my Mac altogether. Well, I shouldn't say that. Little asterisk there. The one thing I still sync over Wi-Fi to iTunes is my photos, because I have a lot of photos in iPhoto, and it's still syncing that way lets me do some things that I can't do with PhotoStream. So PhotoStream gives me my recent photos, but it doesn't let me have all of my photos or all my photo albums and stuff that goes, back past 30 days. So I do still sync my photos, but other than that, I don't do it anymore. I sync apps directly to the cloud. I sync all of my contact calendars, email, bookmarks, like all that stuff. I just sync to iTunes, to iCloud. It was a sort of mental, I don't know. There was a certain mental leap I had to make to get to the point where I no longer synced apps locally. That was the thing that I had this block about. But I gotta sync my apps locally. But it's once I sort of stopped doing that, I actually deleted all the files of all of my apps off of my Macs, so that they didn't try to sync and keep updating themselves. I found that life was more convenient. I had less work to do, and it didn't produce any problems, and I've been doing that for a long time. Now, some people who use movies and music differently than I do wouldn't want to stop syncing those things locally, because if you're constantly, if you're very frequently downloading movies and TV shows to your iOS device, then it can take a lot longer to do that over the cloud than it does if you're just syncing to a Mac. So that would be a case where syncing still makes sense, but I just don't use my iOS devices very much for syncing videos and music and stuff. That's just not my usage style. So it's not a big deal for me.
So syncing, well, let's go back, because I want to be clear on this.
Sure.
I can sync some media hardwired. I can sync others over iCloud. Can I not? In other words, well, maybe I should ask it instead of trying to say it.
So there are sort of three situations. One situation is the stuff that syncs over the air to iCloud, to Apple's servers, to iCloud, and that stays in sync via push. So it stays in sync automatically. So these are the things like email, contacts, calendars, bookmarks, reminders, notes, reading list, like maybe a couple other things, but these are all sort of live data, and they're types of data where they're very sort of atomic. Now you can, if you want, sync any of those types of data with iTunes instead of iCloud. And when you are syncing with iTunes, you can either do it over a USB cable or over Wi-Fi. And other than the speed, there's no difference in what types of data you can sync with iTunes over Wi-Fi or USB. Then there are all the other things. So things like apps, books, TV shows, music, movies, all the media. The way they sync with, those aren't actually part of iCloud is basically the point, is that they sync with Apple's servers. So Apple knows what media you have purchased, and if you delete something off an iOS device, you can go back and re-download it, whether it's an app or whether it's a TV show or music or whatever. But this is totally separate from iCloud. You can do this whether or not you are an iCloud member. It has nothing to do with iCloud as such. Apple sometimes, and I talk about this stuff in my book because Apple sometimes positions it as part of iCloud, but it doesn't require iCloud at all. So if there are situations where, like, okay, you can optionally back up your iOS device to iCloud. And so if you get a new iOS device and you restore from your backup, or you wipe your iOS device and you restore from a backup, that backup doesn't actually contain things like your apps. What it does contain is a sort of list of, okay, his apps were grouped in these different folders on these different home screens. So even if you have to end up saying, I restored my iPhone, oh man, there's a bunch of apps missing. Okay, whatever. I'm going to go into the App Store, go into my purchased, and say, yeah, I need this again. And when they re-download from Apple, they will automatically pop into the same folders and locations that they were when you did the backup. So the backup stores certain types of information, but it's not a live sync. So in other words, if I modify a contact on my iPhone, I'll go over to my iPad. Oh, the contact is modified. But if I if I create a new folder on my iPhone and move an app into it, that's not going to affect my iPad at all. That information is not something that's synced between devices. It's only synced in the sense of Apple knows what my apps are and it remembers where I put them, and it's able to restore that if I restore from a full backup.
And I think you just explained very well why syncing is so difficult and why so many of us have some issues with it, and why it's so difficult to do properly, because there are a lot of ways to think about syncing.
The thing is, Apple has to, Apple, as we have discussed, Apple is not big on giving you a lot of configuration options. Apple's point of view is, we will decide what's best and just do that. So in trying to figure out what would be the simplest thing for everyone, what would be the best, what people are going to expect to be the case, Apple has to do a certain amount of guessing. And for some people, they're going to guess wrong. So, you could certainly make an argument, well, that's not the way I would like to do syncing, or that's not the type of data I would like to sync. You should never do this, and you should always do that. And you could make a great argument about that. But then Apple is going to come back and say, yeah, but that's you. What about somebody else? What about a beginning user? What about somebody who's switching from another platform? What about your uncle? What about your grandma who's just going to look at it in a different way? Apple tends to go for lowest common denominator. They tend to not give you a bunch of configuration options. And that's actually great for less sophisticated users and increasingly irritating for more sophisticated users.
Yeah. It's
so you and I and people of, let's say, our ilk have been getting increasingly irritated with Apple over the years, because what we want, we want a bunch of checkboxes and radio buttons. We want all kinds of preferences that we can mess with and customize things to be exactly the way we want them to be. And Apple's trend has been, no, we're going to reduce the number of options. We're just going to decide how things should be. And because it's simpler that way, it's less confusing, and we're not going to give you things to configure, but then the power users lose out.
Power users and people that like to tweak. I still think you can be a power user and accept some of Apple's decisions. You may start to do some workarounds. You may alter yourself, and that's where none of us like to alter ourselves. We want to do it exactly the way we want, but you can still do it. You can still do it. Joe, what else is in the book that's new? I mean, we started out the show by talking about the brand new two-factor verification.
There is this new book. Yeah. All right. So I'm looking at my list here. So one of the things that the book covers, which I got a little bit of press, but not really very much, is the fact that Apple now, if you sign up for a new Apple ID, let's say a new iCloud account right now, your email address will be something at iCloud.com. You can no longer get something at mac.com or something at me.com. Now, if you already had a me.com or a mac.com address that was active when this change took place, those are grandfathered in. You can keep them. So I still have jwk at mac.com and jwk at me.com. Now I get to add to that jwk at icloud.com. But new users are icloud.com only. And there are some sort of complicated rules as to under which circumstances does Apple give you options for which of the grandfathered addresses and so forth, and it's a little bit of a hassle, but that's all explained in the book. I have no problem with iCloud.com addresses, and at least Apple lets you turn on and off whichever addresses you don't want to use. But that is a bit of a confusing thing for some people. Apple has so I was working on this book, and I was sort of chipping away at it over a period of a couple of months, and I go into a certain screen, I go into the Mail web app on iCloud.com, and I go into a certain preference pane, and I'd say, okay, here's a screenshot of the options on this particular pane, and I'd write about them. And then during editing, which was just a few weeks later, people would say, oh, but no, this doesn't look like that at all. I'm like, Apple changed it again. So a lot of the wording, a lot of the options, the checkboxes and buttons and little doohickeys in various preferences for various apps have been changed a lot. And for all I know, they've even changed in the last week since the last time I looked at them. They're just always fiddling with that stuff. So I brought the book up to date with what it looked like when I finished editing it. And hopefully that will largely resemble what people see when they go to these various parts. Apple adds, it's not just like sort of the tweaky behind-the-scenes preferences, but even bigger things like Apple added VIPs to the web app for Mail. So if you have a VIP in Mail on OS X or on your iOS device, that now syncs with the web app, and that's something new. And as I say, they took out Notes, so that no longer exists as part of Mail. That's a separate thing. Another new thing that Apple added was this Safari tab syncing, and it really isn't tab syncing, which is what I want to have happen is if I open 4 tabs in Safari on my Mac and I open, I go to Safari on my iPhone, then exactly those 4 tabs are open there too. That's not the way tab syncing works. What you get is a little pop-up menu that has a list of all the tabs that are open on all the other devices that you're logged into the same Apple ID with, and then you can say, oh, I want to look at this tab on this device. So, okay, that's fine, that's helpful. The syncing doesn't always happen as rapidly as I would like, so sometimes I'll say, but I know I have this tab open on my iPad. Really, I have to go and find this again on my iPhone? But anyway, that exists, and that exists sort of across all the platforms now. Apple made a bunch of changes to photo streams. So now there's this thing called shared photo streams, and you can access shared photo streams from all your different devices, your Mac, your iOS device, your Apple TV. You can say, I want to invite other people to view a certain group of photos, even maybe people who don't have any Apple devices, and that works now. And so there are all these, again, complicated rules. There were sort of these rules that the regular photo stream followed, like it stores 1,000 photos for up to 30 days, but then there's sort of, if this, then that, all these different kind of exceptions and qualifications, and now shared photo streams follow a different set of rules. So, for example, the items in shared photo streams never expire. Once you put them there, they're always there. But once you get up to 1,000 photos in a shared photo stream, it simply won't let you add any more until you delete some. So it's not that it's not like a regular photo stream where the older ones drop off automatically and you just add new ones to it. Once it's there until you manually delete it. So anyway, talk about shared photo streams. Apple TV software has been getting a lot of updates recently. Some of the recent ones I don't really bother talking about because it's not iCloud specific. Like, last week there was an update to the Hulu app and stuff. But every once in a while there are some things that affect iCloud. And then the Find My Nouns feature, Find My Phone, Find My iPad, Find My Mac, Find My Friends. These various Find My Noun apps have had quite a few updates behind the scenes. The interface looks different, especially if you go to the iCloud website. It's still, the basic functionality is fairly similar, but some of the ways features have been sliced up and the interfaces presented have changed. So I talk about all those things in the book as well.
It's a great list, and I'm glad you brought it up. I think, unfortunately, a lot of us, and I'm guilty of it myself, tend to think of iCloud as documents, the syncing we've talked about, and mail. That's about it. And there really is so much in iCloud and it's all useful. It doesn't mean you have to use it all. Like Find My Friends, no, it's not something I use. I keep Find My Nouns turned on so I can find my nouns if I need to. But you sort of forget about everything that that makes up iCloud, and why it's so important to have a book like this to help walk you through it, keep you up to date, and maybe even expose you to the capabilities of each of the functions.
Right. Yeah, and new things keep coming up all the time. Like we were talking earlier, Apple added this optional two-step verification. So instead of if you for example if you lose your Apple ID password, then instead of answering security questions to reset it, you can now use a combination of a recovery key, which is this random string of digits that Apple generates, and an iOS device. And so Apple can send a code via SMS, but Apple can also use the Find My iPhone or Find My iPad app to send you this code to reset your Apple ID now. So they're coming up with not only new features, but new ways of using the existing apps to help you do useful, interesting things. And I was a little bit surprised to learn, because I just set up the two-step verification for myself, and I was a little bit surprised that this feature worked even on a very old version of Find My iPhone. So I had one iPhone that I hadn't yet updated with, not only with the latest update to Find My iPhone, but like the last few. And it still worked. It still sent me that notification that, here's this code you need to verify your identity. So I think a lot of those behind the scene things that we'll start seeing, where Apple has built in infrastructure that they can begin using in ways that we never really imagined.
Joe, we send folks to Take Control books all the time to look up your books, to look up all the other Take Control authors. How much is this one, and what kind of upgrade policies are there for existing users existing owners of the book?
So this is normally a $15 ebook, and if you buy it new, $15. But because this is not an entirely new edition or version, as we call it, it's a free update. So if you had any previous version of Take Control of iCloud, it's just free. And I think even though it's not a new edition, it's a pretty meaty update, has a lot of new stuff in it. And we mainly wanted to make sure that it was current, that it still tells the truth, or as close as we can get with Apple changing things all the time. So $15 new, free if you had a previous version. One of these days, there will be a, paid second edition of this book, and we hope that everybody will buy that too, but that will be in the future.
Joe, I know you'll be back soon, because I know you have other projects in the works. It's always fun, and it's always educational. I always walk away learning something, and I think I know a little bit about this stuff. So thanks for the time, and thanks for the info.
You're quite welcome.
Folks, that's Joe Kissell. This time, he's the author of the newly updated, in fact, newly updated twice since we talked, Take Control of iCloud from Take Control Books. I'm Chuck Joyner. We'll be back with more soon on MacVoices. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, app.net, Google+, Facebook, and for more Apple, Mac, and tech-related shows, including MacVoices, Mac Notables, the Mac Jury, and the MacVoices Briefing. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com.